My name is Amanda. I'm 30 years old. When I was 8 months pregnant, my sister Jessica announced she was having a high-risk baby and convinced our family to drain the entire nursery fund into her account. But something didn't add up. She never had a baby bump, no appointments, no records, so I called her clinic. They said, "We have no patient by that name." Here's what happened when I confronted her at a family dinner. This is the story of how my own sister faked a pregnancy to steal the money meant for my baby's first year of life. The fund had been built by our entire extended family, and Jessica weaponized something sacred, a mother's trust in her unborn child, as cover for a lie that would have drained every cent. What she didn't know was that I had already started to ask the one question she couldn't answer. Before my sister made her announcement, the baby fund was one of the few beautiful things our family had managed to hold together. It started decades ago when my grandmother, Margaret, who everyone called Nana Peg, tucked a $100 bill into an old cookie tin and said, "This is for the next baby. Every baby deserves a soft landing." By the time I was old enough to understand, that cookie tin had evolved into a formal savings account managed by my Aunt Carol, the family's most trusted and meticulous member. Every aunt, uncle, and cousin contributed what they could birthday money left over, small inheritances, a 20 here, a 50 there, until it grew into a safety net meant to cover the first year of a new baby's life. Diapers, a crib, maybe even a few months of mortgage relief if the parents needed it. It was our family's collective promise to the next generation. No one had touched it yet, because I was the first of the siblings to have a baby. I was 30 years old, married to my husband Mark, and 8 months pregnant with our daughter when my sister Jessica called me on a Tuesday evening with news that felt like a freight train had barreled through my living room. Her voice was trembling, but threaded with that theatrical urgency she'd perfected since childhood. "Amanda, I'm pregnant too. But it's not a normal pregnancy. The doctors say it's high risk. I need help." The timing was uncanny. She was supposedly just a few weeks behind me. The fund had always been intended for any child in the family, and Jessica had never been one to let rules stand in her way. Within days, she had convinced Aunt Carol, and through her, the rest of the family, that her situation was desperate, that she needed immediate surgery and expensive monitoring, and that my pregnancy was easy by comparison. The fund, she argued, should go where the need was greatest. And because our family loved her and couldn't bear the thought of turning away a pregnant woman in trouble, they redirected every cent. $43,000. 9 years of collective saving. Gone from my baby's nursery to her bank account, just like that. I tried to be understanding at first. I really did. But the excuses started almost immediately. She couldn't attend my baby shower because she was on bed rest, though her social media showed her at a concert 2 nights later. She couldn't share sonogram photos because the hospital printer was broken. She couldn't reveal the name of her specialist because she was too emotional to talk medical details. Every time I asked a gentle question, the story shifted. The baby's due date moved. The clinic name changed 3 times, and the biggest red flag, her body. I'd seen her in a tank top just weeks before the announcement, and her stomach was as flat as ever. I told myself that everyone shows differently, that I was being paranoid, that my jealousy over the fund was making me see things that weren't real. Mark held my hand and said, "Trust your gut, but don't blow up the family without proof." So I started keeping a quiet list in a notes app on my phone. Every inconsistency, every canceled lunch, every time she refused to let me accompany her to a doctor's visit. The tension curdled into something cold and heavy inside me. I wasn't just angry, I was afraid. Because if Jessica was lying, then my daughter's safety net had been stolen by someone who was supposed to be one of her primary protectors. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon when Jessica finally named a specific clinic, Mercy Highland, the best high-risk pregnancy center in the city, and the specific doctor she claimed was managing her care. She said it with such confidence that I almost believed her. Almost. But I knew someone who worked in the records department at Mercy Highland, a former nursing school classmate named Greta. And that night, with Aunt Carol's blessing to seek confirmation of medical necessity, I did something I never imagined I'd do to my own sister. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled up Greta's number, and called her not as a desperate sister but as a woman who needed the truth. I asked Greta to look up Jessica's chart. She put me on hold for what felt like an hour. And when she came back, she said just 6 words that shattered everything. "There is no chart, no pregnancy file, no patient history, nothing." Greta's voice was careful, professional, the way nurses speak when they know they're delivering a bomb. I made her repeat it twice, my hand pressed flat against my own very real, very heavy belly. My daughter kicked as if she sensed the ground shifting beneath us. I thanked Greta, hung up, and sat in the dark kitchen for nearly an hour, my mind cycling through every possible explanation. Maybe Jessica gave the wrong clinic name. Maybe she used an alias. Maybe there was a clerical error, a database glitch, some innocent reason why a woman claiming high-risk pregnancy wasn't in the system. But by the time Mark came downstairs and found me staring at a cold cup of tea, I knew the truth had already settled into my bones. My sister had lied about everything. I called Aunt Carol the next morning. Carol is the kind of woman who keeps every receipt, every bank statement, every notarized family decision in a fireproof lockbox. When I told her what I'd discovered, the line went silent for 12 full seconds. Then she said, "I never felt right about this. Jessica was so insistent, so urgent. But I told myself I was being cynical because she's my goddaughter." The weight in her voice told me she was already bracing for the ugly part. The fund wasn't just redirected, it had been fully dispersed. $43,000, wired directly into Jessica's personal checking account over a series of 3 transfers, each one authorized by Carol under the written justification of emergency maternal-fetal surgery. Carol had required documentation, a letter from Mercy Highlands billing department, a medical necessity form signed by a Dr. Elaine Voss. Both, it would turn out, were fabrications. I didn't confront Jessica immediately. If I was going to bring this into the light, I needed undeniable proof, the kind that couldn't be waved away as a misunderstanding. Carol and I agreed to treat this like an audit. We filed a formal records request with Mercy Highland, signed by Carol as the trustee. The hospital's legal department responded within 3 days. The letter was brief and devastating. No patient named Jessica Harmon had ever been seen at Mercy Highland. No physician named Dr. Elaine Voss had ever been employed there. The letterhead and signature on the submitted forms were counterfeit. She had forged medical documents to steal from her own family. But here's the thing I still couldn't reconcile. This wasn't a stranger. This was my sister, the girl I'd shared a bedroom with for 16 years, the maid of honor at my wedding, the woman who cried happy tears when she first felt my baby kick. How does someone you've loved your entire life turn into someone you have to investigate like a criminal? My therapist later told me about factitious disorder, about how some people don't just lie for money. They construct entire realities because they need the attention, the sympathy, the rush of being held at the center. The pregnancy wasn't just a lie. It was a performance, and Jessica had been rehearsing it for months. With the hospital's letter in hand, I approached my parents first. They'd been Jessica's most vocal supporters, arguing that I was being selfish by wanting the fun for myself when my pregnancy was essentially routine. I'll never forget the look on my father's face when I laid the documents on his kitchen table. Denial, then confusion, then a grief so heavy he had to sit down. My mother cried for 3 days. They had given Jessica extra money beyond the fund, thousands from their own retirement savings, because she told them the baby might need a neonatal intensive care stay and her insurance wouldn't cover it. That money was gone too. The dominoes were falling, and every single one landed on our family's heart. Then came the financial autopsy. Carol, with my parents' permission, traced every withdrawal from Jessica's accounts. What we found turned my stomach. There were no payments to any clinic. The $43,000 hadn't gone to doctors or hospitals or medical equipment. It had gone to credit card companies. 5 different cards, all maxed out, all in collections. She'd been drowning in consumer debt for years, shopping, vacations, a lifestyle she couldn't afford but refused to surrender. In one transaction log, I saw a charge for a $1,500 luxury handbag purchased the same week she told the family she needed an emergency cerclage. The bag, it turned out, was still in her closet, tags attached. The pivot came when I discovered she had a second phone. After she dodged my calls for a week, I went to her apartment to deliver some baby clothes my mother had bought for her, a gesture of support my parents still felt obligated to make despite everything. Jessica wasn't home, but her landlord, an elderly woman who'd known us both as children, let me wait in the hallway. While I sat there, a notification buzzed from a phone I'd never seen before, tucked into a side pocket of her mail organizer. The screen lit up with a message from a contact labeled Creditor Solutions Group. I opened the phone. She'd never changed her passcode from our childhood dog's birthday, and found hundreds of texts with debt collectors, layoff notices from the job she'd claimed to still have, and a draft email to a bankruptcy attorney. She hadn't just lied about the pregnancy. She'd lied about her entire life. The baby fund wasn't a temptation. It was a lifeline, and she'd grabbed it with both hands, willing to burn every bridge behind her. At that moment, I stopped feeling sad for my sister and started feeling something much colder. This was theft, plain and simple, dressed in the sacred clothes of motherhood. And I knew that if I let her carry this secret any longer, she would find another way out, another escape, another family to defraud. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I called Aunt Carol and said, "We need to bring everyone together, the whole family, and we need Jessica to be there thinking it's just a normal dinner, then we show them everything." Carol didn't hesitate. She'd been a trustee for 23 years. She believed in accountability, not secrets. Within a week, invitations went out for a family dinner at my parents' house. The stated purpose was to finalize the baby shower plans for Amanda. Jessica RSVP'd immediately. She probably thought she'd dodged the bullet. She probably thought the family had quietly accepted her story and moved on. She had no idea that 48 hours before that dinner, Carol and I had filed a formal police report. She had no idea that the district attorney's office had already opened a preliminary inquiry into felony theft by deception. And she absolutely had no idea that every single person coming to that dinner had already been briefed on the truth and was waiting for her to walk through the door. She walked in 15 minutes late, carrying a small gift bag she'd probably picked up at a drugstore on the way over. A pink teddy bear with a ribbon, a peace offering. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and said, "You look amazing, sis. That baby's going to be so loved." Her voice was warm, the performance flawless. I felt my stomach clench around my daughter, a protective instinct that nearly made me walk out of the room. But I didn't. I sat at the head of the table, Carol to my right, my husband Mark to my left, and 13 other family members arranged around us like a quiet jury. My parents weren't there. We'd asked them to sit this one out, too raw, too compromised. This was between Jessica and the family she'd swindled. Dinner started like any other. My grandmother's lasagna recipe, a salad no one touched. Conversation was stilted but polite. Jessica dominated the air, talking about her latest ultrasound, the baby's strong heartbeat, the specialist who said she might need bed rest until delivery. She'd even brought a sonogram photo, which she passed around the table. I recognized it immediately. A stock image from a pregnancy app cropped and printed. The room stiffened. Uncle Ray passed it to Carol without looking at it. Carol set it down and said, "Jessica, we need to stop. We need to talk about the fund." Jessica's smile flickered but held. She looked around the table, reading the room, and finally saw what she'd been missing for weeks. Not a single face was on her side. My cousin Lydia, who'd contributed $2,000 from her first teaching job, was staring at her plate. My Aunt Dana, who'd sent money meant for a crib, had tears streaming down her face. Jessica tried to pivot, her voice getting smaller. "Is this about the paperwork? Because I can get more documents from Dr." Carol cut her off. "There is no Dr. Voss. Mercy Highland has never heard of you. The forms you gave me were forged. I have a letter from their legal department right here." She slid it across the table. Jessica didn't pick it up. Her face went gray. For the first time in her life, she had no script. And then the "it gets worse" moment arrived. It came from an unexpected source. My cousin Tom, who worked in corporate fraud investigation for a bank. He'd been quiet all evening, but now he cleared his throat and said, "I did some digging of my own after Carol called me. Jessica, I know about the other account." Jessica's head snapped toward him. He continued, calm and methodical. "You opened a high-yield savings account 3 weeks before you made your pregnancy announcement. You deposited the full $43,000, then immediately transferred it to pay off 5 credit cards, a personal loan, and a collection account from a timeshare you bought 3 years ago. But here's the part you didn't expect. You returned the timeshare the next month for a partial refund, and that refund went back into the account. There's still $16,000 sitting there. You never moved it." The room was silent enough to hear a clock ticking in the hallway. Jessica's mouth opened and closed. She'd been caught in a detail she thought no one would find. That's when the dam broke. One by one, family members spoke up. My Aunt Robin revealed that Jessica had asked her for a private loan of $5,000 just 2 weeks ago, claiming the fund wasn't enough and she was desperate. Uncle Greg said she'd hit him up for $3,000, same story. She'd been double dipping, using the family's collective sympathy to extract even more money while the main fund was already gone. I realized with a kind of cold horror that this wasn't a one-time crime of desperation. It was a pattern, a systematic fleecing of the people who loved her most. But the worst revelation was still to come. When Jessica realized she couldn't talk her way out, she tried a different tactic. She started to cry, not the manipulative tears she'd used as a teenager, but something that looked, for a moment, like genuine shame. She said, "I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. My job. I lost my job 6 months ago, Amanda. I was going to be homeless. I panicked." A few people shifted in their seats. Sympathy, the reflex she'd always exploited, started to flicker, and then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my parents. They'd been at the police station. The investigator, a woman named Detective Reyes, had found something else. A previous fraud allegation from 3 years ago in another state, where a former roommate accused Jessica of faking a medical crisis to steal rent money. The case had been dropped because the roommate couldn't afford a lawyer. Jessica had been doing this, perfecting this exact con for years. She wasn't a desperate woman who made one terrible choice. She was a predator wearing a sister's face. I stood up. My voice was steadier than I felt. I read my parents' message aloud to the room, and then I said, "Jessica, the police are waiting outside. Detective Reyes wants to talk to you. You can walk out on your own or they can come in, it's your choice." Her crying stopped like a switch had been flipped. She looked at me, and for a split second I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Not guilt, not fear, but pure, undiluted rage. She'd been unmasked, and she hated me for it. She grabbed her purse and walked to the front door, pausing just long enough to say, "You think you've won? You don't know anything, you never did." Then she was gone, the door closed. Outside, we could hear the low murmur of Detective Ray's voice, the crisp click of handcuffs. My cousin Lydia started sobbing. Carol put her hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's over, it's finally over." But it wasn't, not yet, because Jessica was wrong about one thing: we did know something. We knew exactly what she was capable of, and we were about to make sure she could never do it to anyone again. The house didn't empty for hours. After the police car pulled away, no one wanted to leave. We stood in my parents' living room, holding coffee cups that went cold, trading fragments of memory like evidence at a trial. My cousin Lydia kept saying, "I thought she just needed help. I thought I was helping a mother." Aunt Dana sat on the couch with her face in her hands, whispering that she'd used her Christmas bonus for that crib money. The betrayal had a body count, and every single person in that room was a casualty. Yet beneath the grief there was relief. A long-held secret had finally been spoken aloud. Jessica had been breaking our hearts in slow motion for years. Now at least the wound was clean. I didn't sleep that night. My body felt heavy, anxious, coiled. Around 4 in the morning, a sharp pain rolled through my abdomen and then subsided. 20 minutes later, another. Mark was awake instantly. "It's time," he said. I was 37 weeks pregnant. The stress of the confrontation had triggered early labor. By 6 a.m., we were at Mercy Highland, the real Mercy Highland, the one Jessica had used as a prop, and by 2:30 in the afternoon, after 8 hours of labor, my daughter was born. 6 pounds, 5 ounces. Dark hair like her father, a cry that split the room in two and stitched me back together at the same time. I held her against my chest and felt something I hadn't felt in months: safety. No liar could touch this. No stolen money could diminish it. She was here and she was real. We named her Margaret, after the grandmother who'd started it all with that $100 bill. The family came to the hospital in rotating shifts, bearing flowers and tearful smiles. Carol was the first to arrive. She sat beside my bed, squeezed my hand, and said, "I've already started the recovery process. That 16,000 in Jessica's account is frozen and will be returned to the fund by end of week." It wasn't the full 43,000, but it was a start. Enough for a crib, a car seat, the first few months of diapers. Enough to prove that the family's promise hadn't been entirely broken. The legal resolution took shape faster than any of us expected. Jessica was charged with felony theft by deception, forgery, and financial exploitation of a family. The evidence was overwhelming: the forged hospital letter, the counterfeit doctor's signature, the testimony of 13 family members. She pled guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, 18 months of probation plus a mandatory restitution order. Every month, starting immediately, she would pay $500 directly into the fund until the full balance was restored. If she missed a single payment, the plea deal would collapse and she would face prison time. The court also attached her future tax refunds and any windfall income. This wasn't forgiveness. This was accountability with teeth. While I was still on maternity leave, Carol and I sat at her kitchen table with a legal pad and rewrote the fund's rules from scratch. No more verbal claims. No more trust-based disbursements. From that day forward, Any request for funds would require a notarized medical verification letter sent directly from the provider's office to the trustee, two signatures for any transfer over $1,000, a mandatory waiting period of 10 business days before any disbursement could be executed, and a clause, which I insisted on, that no single beneficiary could ever receive more than half the total fund balance at once. When we presented the new charter to the family, the vote was unanimous. Even my parents, who had been so painfully duped, raised their hands. My father said, "This is how we protect the next one." He was holding baby Margaret at the time. I had never seen him look so old or so determined. And then came the call that changed everything else. 4 months after the trial, Detective Reyes phoned Carol and me with an update that made my blood run cold. Jessica hadn't just victimized our family. The investigation had turned up a long, meticulous paper trail stretching back 6 years. A former roommate in Florida who'd given her $8,000 for what was supposedly a life-saving appendectomy, only to later find out the surgical center had no record of her. An ex-boyfriend in Colorado who'd cosigned a $10,000 loan for prenatal care that never existed. A previous employer who'd paid her short-term disability for a high-risk pregnancy that, you guessed it, was pure fiction. In total, across 5 states, Jessica had defrauded nearly 30 people of more than $110,000. She had been running this con for almost a decade, perfecting the language, the tears, the forged documents. We were not her first victims. We were just the first ones who fought back and won. I sat on my nursery floor and cried when I heard that number. Not for Jessica, but for everyone who had believed her, for the roommate who probably still doubted herself, for the ex-boyfriend who thought he'd failed a child who never existed, and for my own family who had poured their love and savings into a black hole. Then I dried my eyes, picked up my daughter, and whispered something I will teach her for the rest of her life. Trust is a gift, not a birthright. And people who weaponize it don't get to define your story. Today, the Next Generation Fund sits safely in a credit union account, governed by the new rules. Every month, a deposit of $500 appears like clockwork. Jessica's restitution, a forced tribute that will continue for nearly 6 years. The fund has already grown past its original total, because family members, heartened by the new protections, have started contributing again. My daughter's nursery is painted a soft sage green. The crib was purchased with recovered money. The rocking chair came from Aunt Dana, who told me she was honored to buy it. There is still sadness, there is still a scar. But every time I rock Margaret to sleep, I am reminded that this family chose truth over shame, accountability over silence. And when I look at my daughter's face, I see a future that no one can steal. As I write this, Margaret is learning to pull herself up on the edge of the coffee table. She has her grandmother's eyes and this ridiculous belly laugh that fills the whole house. Every month, that $500 deposit arrives, and I watch it land in the fund like a quiet reminder that the truth, even when it takes months, even when it costs you a sister, eventually wins. But I'd be lying if I said I've fully let go of the anger. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the sheer effort Jessica poured into her lie, the forged documents, the rehearsed vulnerability, the way she weaponized everyone's love against them. She could have channeled that energy into almost anything and built a real life. Instead, she burned hours down for handbags and credit card payments. The broader truth I've come to understand is that families are uniquely vulnerable to this. We lower our guard with the people we've known since childhood. We assume shared blood means shared values, but predators don't always come from outside. Sometimes they sit across from you at Thanksgiving, smiling, passing the gravy, while methodically emptying the account you built for your unborn child. The only defense is transparency, verifiable facts, and the courage to ask questions even when it feels like betrayal. Waiting for a liar to confess is not grace, it's complicity. So here's my question for you. If you suspected someone you loved was fabricating a crisis to exploit your family, would you have the stomach to do what I did? Would you pick up the phone and verify, knowing that the answer might detonate every holiday from now until forever? Because that's the choice our family faced, and we chose truth at a price. If this story resonated with you, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment below. Has someone close to you ever used your trust against you? I want to hear your stories, because this happens more than anyone wants to admit. Thank you for listening. I'm Amanda, and my daughter will grow up knowing that her family fought for her before she could fight for herself.